Okay, a very warm welcome to this special edition of the Cofiwch Dryweryn map video updates. It's a very special edition because in the last week, the total number of formally recorded Cofiwch Dryweryn mural examples has crossed over the 150 mark. And that's, I think, a really interesting testament to the durability of this particular form of protest. You know, this has been rattling on for the better part of 2 years now. And despite things like COVID-19, lockdowns, limitations on people's capacity to go out and about into landscapes and go painting, for instance, that hasn't brought an end to this movement. Which I think makes the period that we're going into really interesting. You know, we have national Welsh elections coming up in May. We also have an easing of lockdown. We have the warm, sunny weather coming up that's normally associated with summer, what might be described as ideal painting weather. So it'd be fascinating to see if that sort of that combination of factors will see the movement gather pace again, begin to expand once more, or to see if 150 is sort of the notional peak total that we might expect for something like this. For this week's video, we're doing a bit of a catch-up because I haven't posted a map update video report for a couple of months now for one reason or another. There were 5 new entries that I wanted to draw attention to. Some of those entries are relatively recent, some of those entries are actually significantly older, but for one reason or another they hadn't been recorded on the map until very recently. So for the most part I'm going to be staying within Wales. The first one that I wanted to show was just a quick look at another one of the school examples that's come out. So this is looking in, where are we? This is Llanrhystud that we're looking at here. And if we just scroll out to put this in context. The Llanrhystud entry is interesting in terms of its geography, that it had been a bit of a gap. Which is now quite strikingly filled, but you had examples out west in Pontardawe, in the east in Merthyr Tydfil, some striking examples further south from there, Maesteg, Bridgend and so forth. So perhaps an important gap in the map that's been filled. To show you the example as we load it up now, this is one of the most recent examples. This, I think, is actually entry number 151. Since I started putting this video together, the grand total of Cofiwch Dryweryn murals has gone up to, I think, 152. So just sort of further reinforcing the fact that new entries keep on appearing. This is just a sort of a classic white lettering, red background. It's sort of... I use the words carefully. It's not special in the sense that it's special because it's not special. It's a continuation of the very familiar elements of this form of artwork, this form of protest that has proven to be so durable. It's interesting that it's on a school because I think we are up to, I think, either 15 or 16 school examples now. So it still seems to be something that has relevance and resonance in an educational setting, which might prove controversial for some if they feel this is an inappropriate thing for children to be engaged with. For others it's going to be a really positive thing, a means by which an important chapter of Welsh history is being explored through schooling. It'll probably be slightly divisive along those lines, but double figures now for school examples. One of the other examples I wanted to show you in relation to Wales, if we go down actually to Bridgend now, I say Bridgend, this is more sort of Ogmore Vale, but in and around the surrounds of Bridgend, heading up a bit north, putting in context. So Bridgend down here, and actually this one down here, this is the classic sweet shop example of Cofiwch Dryweryn, one of the very first tribute murals. So we have that down towards the south, but as we push up into the wider landscape, sorry, if we come out of this one, go back down to this example. One of the things I thought was really interesting about this Cofiwch Dryweryn entry is it has the date. So otherwise it's classic, it's typical, very much like the school example, white lettering, red background. But this, I think, is the first example that we have this key date of 1965 added to the mural as well. And I suppose for anybody unfamiliar with Cofiwch Dryweryn, having the addition of that date gives a little bit more reference, context, if you like. So maybe a useful little addition there. But this certainly makes it a unique example. It obviously breaks with the traditional element by elaborating a little bit, but nonetheless, I think it's an interesting and striking example. On a waterway system, we see quite a few of those crop up now. And again, in terms of its place in the landscape, again, you'd say Ogmore Vale was perhaps a bit of a gap prior to this particular example. Another sort of quadrant, if you like, of Wales being represented on this map as well. As we scale out, you can see coverage-wise, it's pretty broad. Still, this large section in Mid Wales, as we push towards the eastern extent, still pretty quiet in terms of examples. But again, as I've said in previous video entries, there's not that much in terms of urban populations, so not that much scope in terms of putting prominent murals for other people to see in landscapes where there aren't that many people to see them. But otherwise, the map has been more a case of numbers increasing than decreasing, and Wales still looking pretty busy in terms of surviving, as far as we know, examples on this map. What I more wanted to draw attention to, we're not done with Wales yet. We will look at one specific example in Wales, which I do think needs drawing attention to. But whilst we're in this broader overview, what we can do is just scroll up here, and you might notice that Liverpool has an example. Now, in previous videos, I've talked about the example in Birmingham, and that having a correlation in terms of English cities being beneficiaries of Welsh water, and it being perhaps relevant for there to be Cofiwch Dryweryn examples recorded in those English urban landscapes. Just show you the Birmingham example here, if we bring it back up. This is quite a small one along a riverway system, but nonetheless, it exists. If we focus in on Liverpool and bring this one up, and we can zoom in on this as well. This is in the Everton Park area. So, a part of Liverpool with a fair degree of prominence. The mural itself is quite small, relatively speaking, and it's a stenciled example. Now, one of the things I find interesting about this is in the 152 examples that I have recorded so far, there are very, very few stenciled Cofiwch Dryweryn examples. I think there may be 2, perhaps 3 in all of those numbers. Now, given the popularity of artists like Banksy and the ease with which you could make a stencil like this, I've always found it a little bit surprising that we don't see that many more stenciled examples. Perhaps that has something to do with the performative element of Cofiwch Dryweryn, that there is something to be said for painting up a wall in red and painting on the letters in white. It's a process that takes time, and it has that striking visual aesthetic, which of course this doesn't. This has the red lettering as opposed to the white lettering and no formal backdrop. But I suppose what this does allow for is a relatively quick paint job. This is a spray can, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. you're done in a few moments' time. And so, in terms of spreading the idea or the message of Cofiwch Dryweryn, stenciling seems an interesting addition, but it's perhaps as interesting because of its absence in the wider community of Cofiwch Dryweryn examples. But maybe examples like this will be a trigger for more. We'll be monitoring and seeing what happens. Now, the fourth of the 5 examples that I wanted to share with you today is actually an example that was painted a significant time ago, back in the early part of 2020. To find it, we need to zoom right out, and in terms of my setup on the video, you can actually see it above me. We're really zooming out on this one, okay? So we've had examples in North America. We've got 3 examples there, very well established. But we have to zoom even further out to this point. As we go down to the southern coast of Argentina, we're almost off the map now. And if we zoom on in, we will come into the Falkland Islands. Now, I've got the example up there above me. We'll bring it up in this screen as well. So we know that this example was painted early part of 2020. The exact dates are not overly specific, but you got an example in the little flag painting next to it, February, July 2020. So it's within that time period that this example was added. Now, this is painted within, or probably drawn with pen by the looks of it. This was added as part of the military installation there. And this is actually an internal example, as far as I can tell. And usually I've been quite reticent about adding internal examples of Cofiwch Dryweryn, primarily because I've often seen Cofiwch Dryweryn as something that is external. It is there to be seen by people. That's how it communicates its message. But every now and again I do make exceptions within the map for examples that are perhaps a little bit more striking and significant than others. And I would say a Cofiwch Dryweryn in the Falkland Islands is geographically significant enough to warrant inclusion, even though it is an internal example. But I think it's really interesting to see it there, and it's sort of it's setting records that'll be hard to challenge in a respect, because we're at a pretty southern point. Even if Welsh expats in Australia start to produce examples, they can't rival the southerly extent of the Cofiwch Dryweryn landscape now. So in terms of this being a truly global artistic and or protest movement, it's nudging towards it with this example in the Falklands. So I think that's a really interesting addition. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about this week is probably one of the murals that is most familiar to us, and that's dealing with Llanrhystud. Now, I've included it on the map in green here. Now, if we zoom in, just so you're familiar with where it is, interesting actually that in terms of the wider Cofiwch Dryweryn landscape, it does sort of sit on its own. It's surprising that there aren't that many more sort of copycat examples closer to the site of the original. But nonetheless, perhaps because of the geographical proximity, it's not necessary in the eyes of artists pursuing this. Now, the reason why I have added it now is, as the image hopefully loads, I think this is a slightly higher resolution image, yeah. The reason I've included it now is you're probably aware, if you follow the Cofiwch Dryweryn saga, that the gable end structure that the original painting was produced on in that midpoint of the 1960s was recently restored. It was part of, and I hesitate to use the word conservation, because what's taken place at Llanrhystud is not conservation. This was an exercise in rebuilding. Conserving is stabilizing it and making something safe and durable. This was rebuilding something that had previously been lost. Now, as part of the rebuilding process, the mural that was there prior to the reconstruction was pretty much washed away. It was stripped back. And one of the things that I'm actually working on is a paper which argues that in the last 2 years, if you think back to when the Elvis sign was painted over the Cofiwch Dryweryn lettering, when part of the wall either fell down or was knocked down, I would still argue that this moment in the history of Cofiwch Dryweryn, in particular at Llanrhystud, was actually the single most damaging moment, because the mural that had been conserved and patched and been repainted, and you had those quite famous images now of young Welsh language supporters gathering by car headlight to repaint and repair the mural. That particular version of the mural was the one that's been destroyed. And I say that not particularly critically. I just think that's what's happened. That version of Cofiwch Dryweryn was destroyed, and then it was replaced with this example. So what I'm arguing is that since the wall was reconstructed to its full extent, and this new mural was added, and interesting with certain things omitted. The Iliad hasn't been restored. You don't see the Free Wales Eriowen symbol included here, whereas it had been quite a common feature in more recent versions of the Llanrhystud painting. Here you have what I would argue is a brand new example. So I have actually taken this as sort of year zero for Llanrhystud. I'm saying that this is a brand new mural and is added to my Cofiwch Dryweryn list as a new entry. I can't quite remember where this comes in. I think it's around about entry number 148 or 147, there or thereabouts. But I'd be really interested to hear people's thoughts about this. I've included it on the map as a green entry. It is the only green entry, and it will remain the only green entry, because I do think that there's an obvious greater level of significance to this location and its position within this wider Cofiwch Dryweryn landscape. That is our starting point. It's sort of green for go, isn't it? That's where this whole process begins. But I think what's really important to remember, from a perspective of a historian or heritage professional, that which we see at Llanrhystud today is not the mural that was there in 1965. Indeed, it's not the mural that was there in 2020, whatever year we're in, nor was it the example that was there in 2019. This is a brand new example. And from my perspective, I am making the argument to say that it should be treated as a brand new example by virtue of a number of factors. The fact that the literal shape of the wall upon which it was painted has changed profoundly from any other phase in the Cofiwch Dryweryn painting's history. So the visual landscape of the site has changed, as well as the sort of the physical fabric of the mural that people see there today. And I suppose if I'm being a little bit picky, stylistically, I kind of prefer the Cofiwch Dryweryn that was painted on the wall before this version. But it's whether by design or natural weathering, this example will fade over time, and at some point somebody will paint it again. I have made the argument that there is probably a Cofiwch Dryweryn for every generation in Wales. It is something that is part of a constant process of rebirth. But of course the site is notionally now conserved and safeguarded. So will we see more examples, or will a process of sort of fossilization take place, which actually discourages people looking to express the feelings of nationalism, patriotism, protest, whatever it might be, through the Cofiwch Dryweryn process, if you like. Or will this be seen as the formal, definitive version, and the process just stop there? I think it's a really interesting thing to monitor, and we'll see what happens with it over the coming weeks, months, and potentially years if we keep this project going for that long. But there we go. I think that's all I wanted to post for this particular entry. But as I say, 150 examples up, examples appearing in Liverpool, in the Falklands. And I have had a communication from someone in Patagonia who is enthusiastically promising me that we will be seeing an example in Patagonia before long as well. So, really interesting to see where these pop up next. I'm hoping to post another video on this as we get to probably the midpoint in May, and we'll see if there are any new examples, see if any examples are lost. As I stressed at the start of the video, with lockdown measures easing, what we will be in a position to do is monitor the examples that had been painted before this point in time far more effectively than we have been able to do so at any other point in, say, the last 6 to 12 months. So that'll be really useful for getting a sense of how healthy some of the existing murals are, if indeed they still exist. So as ever, if you have a Cofiwch Dryweryn example, or if you know of an example that did exist but now no longer exists, I would love to know. It'd be really useful, so please do leave some comments. Always appreciated if you consider subscribing, and look forward to catching you on the next update around about this time next month. Alright, thanks very much. Geographical. Hwyl am